Aid.
Welcome back to the closing bell. We're just about a minute and a half away from the closing bell on this Friday. We're going to close out one of the best weeks for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or I should say the best week for the Dow Jones Industrial Average since November of last year. And as we head toward the closing bell, we've seen a turnaround in the markets. The transport's leading at around 3 o'clock or so. They started to turn positive. Right now, they're up about 6 points. The Dow Industrials followed suit, and right now up just about 2. Now, if this holds, of course, it's going to be another record day for the blue chip index. Today, we are also seeing records for the Russell 2000 today. Different story for the utilities index, which earlier this week hit a record close. It's fractionally lower today. Today, for the most part, stocks have been held in a fairly narrow range, but this week there were a couple of key things. First of all, of course, you had Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke's two-day testimony. He basically eased fears about inflation picking up. He said it's still a possibility. The Fed stands ready to raise rates, but the markets took it as a sign that the Fed, at least for now, is on hold, and it helped to drive the rally, along with some more M&A activity that we have heard about for some time and some decent earnings, as well as stock buybacks from a number of blue chip companies this week, including Caterpillar, 3M, and Honeywell. Now, today, the drag on the market for most of the session was Microsoft, the company raising concerns, or Sue Ballmer saying, you know what, Vista estimates may be too high. As the closing bell comes down here on this Friday afternoon, the Dow looks like it's going to finish at another record, ringing the closing bell today. Guests of the New York Historical Society. Now for the second hour of the closing bell, we head back to New Jersey and Bill Griffin.
Could Chrysler and GM be ready to merge lanes? Details on a report claiming GM is in preliminary talks to buy the Chrysler Group. And a breakthrough in balding. The FDA says this comb is the real deal. We'll find out how it works when we talk to the company's chief operating officer. And from Pooh Corner to the courtroom, Disney loses a very long battle over one of its most popular and profitable characters. Looks like we may have a record today, although it's very close at this point. Investors have been digesting a lot today. A huge decline in housing starts to a cautious outlook on Microsoft for its Vista operating system. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, as the bell is ringing for this Friday, is showing a fractional gain. Any positive close will be a new record for the Dow. The NASDAQ was trying to go positive late in the day. The S&P down a fraction, down about 1.5 points at this point at 1455. Still too close to call at this point. We'll watch this very carefully. Shares of GM and Chrysler also gained ground today on reports of a possible takeover. A lot of skepticism on that, though. A report from Automotive News is driving speculation about that possible deal. So far, neither GM nor Chrysler are confirming talk of a potential acquisition. We have more now. Let's go to CNBC's automotive reporter, Phil LeBeau. Phil?
And Bill, we have to stress again that when we talked with both companies, both of them officially are saying there is nothing to talk about here. We don't comment on who we might be discussing future acquisitions with. But I have to tell you, from talking with people both in Detroit as well as on Wall Street in New York, there seems to be a healthy amount of skepticism that these talks, which may be very cursory and exploratory, will actually lead to anything substantive down the line. Take a look at what we're talking about. If General Motors and Chrysler were to gain, will shed the Chrysler division, and that's why people continue to ratchet up shares of DCX.
Yeah, a lot of skepticism about GM, but maybe another deal could happen somewhere else.
You bet.
Phil LeBeau, thank you very much. By the way, tonight, On the Money goes full speed ahead to find out what's going on in Detroit and how America can get its auto industry back on track. That's tonight, On the Money at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, Mary Thompson is our eye on the floor at the New York Stock Exchange. Mary?
And Bill, it looks as if things hold right now. The Dow will finish at a record level for the third straight day. Right now, up 2.5 points. Keep in mind the settlement is usually around 4:15 Eastern, but it's been holding there for a while, so I'm thinking we had another record today. Whatever happened, it was the best week for the Dow Jones Industrial Average since November. The blue chip average very strong this week, thanks to comments from Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke easing concerns about inflation for the markets. Also, a number of stock buybacks from blue chip companies and some M&A activity driving the Dow Jones Industrial Average for this week as we take a look at a one-week chart, up 1.46%. Again, its best performance since November. Want to check on a couple of Dow movers. Microsoft was a drag drag on the blue chip average today, again because concerns cited by Steve Ballmer saying some analyst estimates about Vista sales could be overly aggressive. Alcoa was the big winner among the Dow components this week. Some takeover speculation driving its stock. And Caterpillar, 3M, and Honeywell. These companies all announcing multi-billion-dollar stock buybacks this week, and they benefited from that. Of course, we've been focused on airlines throughout the day. Talk, of course, or I should say reports, that British Airways and a group including Goldman Sachs were going to make a bid for the company. Its stock responded, although another story downplayed the previous story that was written in Business Week magazine. One thing to note, I think that's of interest, the company had a secondary offering of 13 million shares back in January, and it granted the buyers the chance to buy another 1.9 million shares within 30 days at the offering price of $38.70, which would be slightly below this. It's just kind of interesting timing, something to keep in mind. Nevertheless, whatever happened with AMR, it spilled over into the rest of the airline group because once again it raises speculation about whether or not this industry is going to see consolidation. A lot of people have been talking about it. A lot of the questions right now is where, when, and who. And so it gave a lift to some of the other U.S. carriers. British Airways shares slightly lower, again, on those reports of maybe or maybe not it's part of a group to buy AMR. Bill, back to you.
Mary Thompson, thank you very much. Now, as we've been telling you, market sentiment was dampened somewhat today by the weaker than expected economic news we had, especially from the housing sector. Construction on new homes collapsed last month to its lowest level since 1997, and a key indicator of future building activity turned lower as well. From Washington, CNBC's Diana Olick breaks down the nuts and bolts of that report in our Realty Check. Diana?
Well, Bill, this drop is certainly bad news for those who dig holes in the ground and those who sell supplies to builders. But it could actually be healthy for the big builders who are really in a sales spiral right now and need to get rid of